Hey there, folks! Welcome to the second video in my series on boundaries. If you haven't watched the first video where I talk all about boundaries and how they're more like bridges than barriers, go back, watch that one first, then come back here and watch this one. I'm setting this boundary with you. There is a ton of great information in there that will help you better understand the next two videos. So stay tuned for the third video where I talk about how to handle boundary violations. Hi, I'm Tia, licensed therapist at Roots Relational Therapy. I make videos that offer tips on how to improve your relationship with yourself and other people. Today, we're continuing our conversation about boundaries with 10 tips on how to set better boundaries. Understand why you need the boundary in the first place. If you don't have a compelling reason to set this boundary, you won't be able to follow through with enforcing it. Clearly identify your boundary. If you aren't clear on what your boundaries are, it's going to be really hard for you to try and explain it to someone else. You won't be able to communicate your expectations. Take the time to figure out what the right boundary is for this relationship at this specific time in order for it to be sustainable and effective. Be straightforward. In order to spare feelings or minimize conflict, it can be tempting to be kind of vague and just dance around what you're expecting and what your boundaries are because you don't want to make them upset. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't be cryptic. Don't be vague. The kindest thing that you can do is to be direct about it. Say what you mean and mean what you say. I know that it's tough, but remember from our first video where the whole point of boundaries is to make the relationship more enjoyable and sustainable over time. You setting boundaries gives the other person reassurance that you want to keep it going. Don't apologize and don't give long explanations. This kind of behavior undermines your authority and makes them doubt whether you're going to stick to it. It sends the impression to the other person that they can convince you out of it because you doubt it yourself. If you're apologizing or having to convince them or yourself with a really long explanation as to why this boundary is important, it gives them the sense that they could talk you out of it. It seems like you doubt yourself, which you don't, and gives the impression that you're doing something wrong, which you aren't. Use a calm and polite tone. This means keeping your emotions in check. You want your message to be heard, understood, and respected. Don't try and set boundaries in the middle of an argument and neither of you are thinking clearly. Yelling, sarcasm, or a condescending tone can put people on the defensive and distract from the real issue. Maybe part of the reason why it's so hard to be calm and polite is because some boundaries need to be put in the relationship. Start with tighter boundaries. It's always easier to loosen tight boundaries versus trying to tighten loose boundaries. If it's appropriate to your relationship or the situation, boundaries can be gradually loosened up over time. But don't rush this part. As things start to get better, it can be easy to want to loosen the boundaries and give them a reward. But don't rush into loosening up the boundary if you feel like you or the other person isn't ready for that. This could be a really good opportunity to reflect on why you set the boundary in the first place and making sure that things are aligned with what you feel comfortable with. You always need to be checking in with yourself to see if something is working or not. Address boundary violations early. Small problems are always easier to manage than big problems. Don't wait until a person has violated your boundary a dozen times before you decide to speak up. You will be in a state where you can't communicate as well. They've already rubbed you raw. It puts you at a disadvantage because they've crossed the line so many times without correction. You kind of communicated to them that it was okay. Why did they get a pass before and not now? They've learned that that's not a real boundary for you. They learned that even if they don't follow your boundary, they'll still get access to you. There's no natural consequence of losing connection with you because they didn't respect your boundary. It's not fair to expect people to know your boundaries before you've communicated and enforced them. They need to know to take you seriously and that their actions have consequences with you. Don't make it personal. Setting and enforcing a boundary is not a personal attack on them. If someone does consider it a personal attack, that's a sign that you made a great decision in setting that boundary. We set boundaries for our own sake. So if someone is violating your boundary, don't make them out to be a bad person. People typically aren't as evil as you think. Communicate from a stance of your own needs and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Don't make it about them. The boundary is being put on the context or the situation of how they connect with you, not on them as people. Use a support system. Have backup. Rely on your support system to keep you accountable. Let's be real. Setting and maintaining boundaries is tough. It can bring up a lot of questions and uncomfortable feelings or doubts on whether or not you should have the boundary, or if you should just accept things as they are, or if you should just give up. We wonder if it's worth the effort to deal with and to handle. Is it easier to just let things go? Yeah, it's a lot easier to just let it go, but it's not easier to be unhappy for the rest of your life or the rest of your relationship with this person. A strong support system will keep you accountable and remind you of why you set the boundary in the first place. Trust your intuition. Slow down, tune into yourself, and pay attention to what you're feeling. What is your gut telling you about this person or situation? If the context of this certain relationship doesn't feel comfortable, create or renegotiate boundaries until it feels right. Consider these 10 tips on how to build better boundaries, a good guideline or outline to start with. Remember, your goal is to keep the relationship and to make it easier and more enjoyable, to create a space that's physically and emotionally safe and worth your while to be around. Your relationships should be somewhat enjoyable, not always perfect, not amazing all the time. The goal is to improve the quality of your life and the quality of that relationship. As a therapist, I'm obviously biased towards therapy and believe that most people can benefit from the therapeutic process. If you struggle with respecting other people's boundaries or setting and maintaining your own boundaries, therapy is a great place to practice acknowledging your needs, navigating tough boundary conversations authentically and respectfully, as well as feeling prepared to respond when people violate your boundaries. If you're curious about what therapy might be like for you, visit my website at rootsrelationaltherapy.com. Schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation with me so we can get started together. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and share it with a friend. If learning tips from a therapist is interesting to you, I would highly recommend subscribing because I got more good stuff for you. Okay, you can sleep on my bed, but not on my face.